Because you can't. Don't know why.
I'm gonna do something else then. Uh, I'm just gonna like actually be on Bloodborne.
Okay.
Okay.
I just
Sounds good to
started
me.
the stream.
Same.
So, hello everyone. Astri here.
Welcome.
I'm with Scorched Knight and Swing Dog,
Hello.
and
Greetings.
Yo,
we just wanted to give a critical review of Bloodborne, the mechanics, the overall style, theme, and then also talk a bit about community stuff that's been going on lately. So first thing that I wanted to talk to, the good parts about Bloodborne. What do you guys think are the high points in Bloodborne?
Well, the setting is really, I really enjoy, like, the thing that really brought me into Bloodborne, to be honest, was the settings and the themes. When I saw like just the overall aesthetics of the game, and then I found out there was like H.P. Lovecraftian influences, and it just kind of dragged me in, to be honest.
it's the same
Um,
thing for me. I really liked Dark Souls, obviously, but like there was something always kind of boring to me about the settings of the Dark Souls games. Like it was always really kind of almost what? How would you say it? Kind of like average, I guess. Whereas like Bloodborne kind of took it a step further, where it was different. It was a very unique style to it, and that really drew me in as well. Uh, Plus like just the fact that it's so much faster, you know, it's so much more fluid to me
I
than
agree.
the Dark Souls games, where like the controls are so much tighter feeling. It like really complements well with the fast pace of the combat and the kind of the exhilarating feel to it.
yeah, I agree 100%.
What do you think about the weapons overall?
I think they definitely did the right thing with, especially with the complement of the fast-paced combat. Going with normal, just like swords or spears or whatever, just wouldn't have gone well with that kind of theme. The fact that they tried to use very interesting designs and even like the uh, most basic
I'm busy, Dan.
of weapons are still cool in a way.
Yeah, like for me, the that's the thing about Bloodborne that is kind of disappointing about the other games when I go to them. Like, let's say I use, and I know everybody's gonna laugh, but there's like the Burial Blade, for instance. I play with the Burial Blade in Bloodborne. I'm like, man, this is so badass. This is awesome. And I go play Dark Souls 3, and the Scythe is like, wow, this is boring as fuck. Like, this is not
Yeah,
the the move set. And there's so many. That's the thing too about the weapons of Bloodborne. There's so many different moves you can do. Where Dark Souls, all you basically have in the Dark Souls games is R1, R2, backstep R1, running R1, and then jump attack. That's pretty much it. In
yeah.
Bloodborne, I mean, then in DS3 they added weapon arts, but a lot of the weapon arts for each weapon are like clones of each other. Um, the but Bloodborne, they have, you have side step. Some weapons have like extra moves than some other ones. Like for instance, one thing that's cool about the Burial Blade, if you sidestep one way and do R1, you swing in that direction. If you sidestep the opposite direction, you swing in that direction as well. Like it's two different swings depending on which way you dash. Sideways to the right, sideways to the left. You have the backstep R1, backstep R2, transform attack. Two different transform attacks. You have two different R1s, two different R2s. You have jump attack, L2, and there's follow-up L2s. That's the other thing too. There's different R1s too. It's not the same two R1s over and over. Um,
Yeah, there's even
even
like
though R1
weird.
spam is frowned upon, at least each R1 does different. Like there's like four different R1s.
Yeah.
Um, makes it quite interesting.
Plus, like the switch attacks just add so much to the potential of the weapons because a lot of times you can actually catch people by unlocking and switch attacking and then switching directions, whereas in Dark Souls, basically the only thing you could do with that was R2.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
with that and the added benefit of just like the switches in general, it
For
just
sure.
made the weapons so much more enjoyable. And like a lot of them, you can actually main a weapon and never get bored of it. Kind of like how you use the burial blade all the time, and I can use
Yeah,
different weapons, and it's just like I never get tired, I never get bored of any of the weapons that I use. They're always interesting to me, and I always find out new
same.
shit about them.
You know what I liked about them?
Exactly.
I liked how a lot of the weapons, the fact that you could transform them made it so that you could fluidly transition between two different move sets, and that was really groundbreaking because up until now, we've had weapons that are either A or B, one hand or two hand, and this game changed that dynamic by giving you that second move set that's entirely different, but it flows between those two different move sets.
Exactly.
Right, exactly.
Like
Because
the
the
go ahead.
uh, I was gonna say, even if it's kind of meta, the Scythe has a very interesting moveset and it's very fluid, and everything about it is really good. The short form has its own unique style, and the long form has its own unique style, where the long form is a little bit slower, but it has a wide range, while as the short form is very quick, but it has a very limited range, like very straightforward and everything like that, but you never feel like there's a big divide between the two. Like you can always just like flow between each attack, even if you're switching between long and short form throughout it. And a lot of weapons are the same exact way. Even if they are kind of like the most boring weapons in the game, they're still more exciting than any weapons in Dark Souls.
Ah, interesting. Okay. Apparently you guys are slightly quiet, so
Okay,
you just gotta
so
speak up slightly more.
all right. So another thing that I wanted to bring up is the ability to punish heals in this game. The fact that we have a ranged option to deal with heals. That was another really interesting idea that any kind of we didn't have any way of punishing heals at range in previous games except, maybe using a spell if you're a mage, but pure melee didn't have that option. So I find it really interesting that we were given the ability to parry heals in this game and punish, capitalizing on that. It made it so that heals were more natural in combat, in my opinion.
Yeah, the one thing about Dark Souls that made healing uh, hard was there was not a huge amount of punish for it. You know, there was obviously the animation where you could get hit during that animation, but it didn't really uh, punish in a way because you're still getting health back, whereas in Bloodborne you can actually time it right and get a heal parry and like actually punish them for trying to backpedal and heal and prolong the fight, even if it's kind of bad. You can still get that going, and it was an interesting mechanic, and I'm kind of glad they implemented it. I just wish they uh, kind of helped us out by widening the window to compensate for latency.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's one of the things I really love about Bloodborne as well is how you can punish the heals and uh, it's just so cool. Like the way it, I don't know, it's so satisfying is what it is. It's that you can punish them in such a way like that.
So the next point that I want to bring up is actually it might come to some surprise to you, but I feel like the Chalice dungeons had a lot of potential, and there are some very enjoyable aspects of it, like the random map, the procedurally generated dungeons, the uh, the variety of enemies. It's kind of lacking sometimes, but you can find a lot of variety in some of the rare layouts. Um, the the ability to go back and revisit bosses and then find different loot. The dungeon crawling aspect of it really appealed to me. And I wanted to get your take on that too.
Yeah, the dungeons, I always thought they were so cool. The way their idea was, the idea they had for the dungeons was such an amazing idea. The enemies, I like how the enemies are, quite a bit different from what you see in the main game. Um, uh, it's very, it does, like when you open a route and you're like in a new weird layout, it's so it's so cool not knowing like what's in the rest of this dungeon. Like you don't know like anything really about like the layout per se. Um, there's there's some really annoying things about the dungeons, of course, but I think they were a great idea overall. I think they just should have narrowed the focus down a little bit on the dungeons, maybe put more of that effort into the main game. But that's just me. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but
So the way I see it is like it adds a lot of replayability to the game itself, but a lot of that replayability should have been added to the main game. You know, they should have probably put a little more focus because it is compared to Dark Souls 3, Dark Souls 2, or even Dark Souls 1. It is short compared. Um, but the dungeons did add a lot more to it, and it also obviously added a lot more to the PvP because of the gems. I think had the gems not been a factor in it, I probably wouldn't have cared too much about the Chalice dungeons themselves. I would have obviously completed it for the platinum, but I would have never revisited them had it just been extra stuff. You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
I agree.
One one thing I think they did wrong though was the loot you actually get in the dungeons is kind of lackluster. A lot of it, at least. What most of the loot comes down to is, oh, like, oh, here's some cold blood, or oh, here's some more ritual materials to make more dungeons. There's
Yeah,
no. The only time you really get anything cool in the dungeons, like, like loot that's like, oh, wow, this is new, I've never seen that before, is the claws. Like the beast claws. There's an actual weapon you get in the dungeon. Like, voila, that's cool loot. Like an actual weapon you can only get in the dungeon. That's pretty cool. Like if there was more weapons maybe in the dungeons or maybe arc tools, I don't know, maybe something that like, oh, honestly, I don't know. I mean, you can't really say that per se for the random loot, but it was kind of cool when I went through the main dungeons and I was like, oh, look, the beast claws. This is cool, a new weapon. Wasn't expecting that. But then after that, like when I was a noob and new to the game, I'd do root dungeons and, it was kind of disappointing. The only thing you ever really get is, like vials, bullets, coins, and then
Hmm.
chalice materials. And then, of course, the gems, and you need those, but given it would have been cool if there was more like I don't know, like if there was, I mean, there's the runes as well,
More
which you need
equipment,
those.
basically.
Yeah, more equipment, maybe like
yeah.
armors you could get in the dungeons or besides like the like two boss armors you get from the dungeons. Maybe if there was more of that in there, more armors,
or even
maybe some
spells or
special. Yeah,
something like
exactly, like
that.
some arc tools or I don't know if there was just more like cool loot that was just kind of hidden around, some rare, some not, but not nothing, like too crazy where like if somebody gets it and everybody, it's a little. I mean, well, I mean, given that you can share the glyphs, I mean, it could, somebody could be like, oh, well, I found this, this, and this in this dungeon.
Yeah.
People can share their finds, and I mean, they do that still with the chalice materials and stuff, but it would have been cool to see more unique loot in the dungeons.
I think that we
Yeah,
would
I
have gotten
definitely
a lot of
agree.
that. I think we would have gotten more of that if they had gotten rid of some of the story chalice dungeons, made it so that it scaled up faster and we didn't have a bunch of different lower level chalices. And they actually implemented the cut content chalices like that fire
Yeah,
chalice and the depth 5 Hintertomb. I think that those would have been really interesting. Like Hintertomb, it's poison, very obviously
yeah,
poison, and that would have been a
but
really good spot to put all of the best poison gems
yeah, I
and
agree.
weapons.
See, the other problem is that I find is they should have made the Hinter Tomb. They should have made Depth 5 Hinter Tombs, and as you said, that should have been where you got all your poison gems. The other thing they should have done too is they should have made the dungeon look different from a Sumeru. Like it's like a Sumeru clone, but oh look, let's change the water to poison water, and the smoke urns the poison. You know what I mean? It would have been cool if like it looked different too, and it wasn't just like the same Sumeru dungeon
Right.
with except with poison. It would have been
The
kind of cool if they did that. And
what
another
I
thing, real quick, that
okay.
Binzi actually brought this up in the chat. Well, what he said made me think of this. What if another cool thing would have been if the uncanny and lost versions of weapons looked a little bit different from like the normal weapons. So it was like it's the same weapon, but because of the gem fortification, certain gem fortifications are usually used for different gem setups, like arcane gems or tempering. Or it would have been cool if maybe the lost uncanny weapons looked a little bit different from each other. I don't
Hmm.
know. I think that would have been kind of cool too. Would have added like an aesthetic reason to get some of these weapons.
I think it would have been
Right.
really interesting if they allowed you to modify your weapons to a greater degree. Like, say you want your saw cleaver to be a fire saw cleaver, or what if you gave it that fire effect on the exterior as, a way to show that it is fire?
Right,
Yeah, yeah, that makes
exactly.
sense.
It makes it
Yeah,
so boring when it's just the effect when you hit them. Like there's no telling whether or not it's a fire or a bolt saw spear. Or
yeah,
even
yeah.
like
Kind of
that
like,
like phantasm shell, even if it was like a slightly lesser version on an arcane weapon or,
yeah,
slight little
Right.
fire
kind of like
effect or
how,
even a smoking effect on
Like
a fire weapon
like
or
ho
like a
kind
little
of like
Holy Blade.
glitchy
crystal.
lightning effects.
Kind of like how in DS1, if you infuse something with crystal, it has the crystalline effect. You know what I mean? After you've infused it, right?
Right, exactly.
Right.
And
That'd be pretty sick if it had something like that.
that's kind of stuff that they seem to have initially wanted to do. Like if you watch the initial gameplay trailers, you see there's one clip where someone is fighting Gascon with the saw cleaver and it's got lightning running up and down the blade. I feel like that's what they wanted to do, and then they just gave up on that idea because it was too much at one time. They were trying to rush through and get everything done so that
Right.
they could catch up and work on Dark Souls 3.
Yeah,
Which is a real shame. There was obviously a lot of stuff they wanted to do with Bloodborne that would have been really great for the game had they just actually went ahead with it. But it does feel like some things were really rushed and unfinished, and you have to really dig through the game and find that kind of thing to really notice that. But it is definitely there, and when you bring it up, it does uh, make me kind of yearn for that kind of thing where, my fire saw spear is really boring to look at, but it's definitely more interesting than just a regular tempering.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that kind of intros us into the next section of this podcast, talking about balance issues. The reason that they had so many balance issues with this game is because of that rush that they did to put the game out as quickly as they did. They had a lot of things that they wanted to do and they just didn't get around to it. Like when I read through the official guide that was made before the game was released, you read through that and
Oh
there's
man.
so much stuff in there that does not make sense because it never made it to the final game. Like
Right.
Shikage was supposed to be ideal with nourishing gems, and yet upon final release it was tempering that actually made it. And I think part of it has to do with the fact that Miyazaki was pressured into putting PvP in the game when he didn't want to. They hadn't anticipated that they would be putting PvP in the game, so it shows in how they were balancing weapons. They were not really thinking about it, at least from a
Right.
multiplayer point of view.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There are a lot
And
of
I can,
weapons that feel like they have certain things that just make them completely broken. Like, the staggering effect is fine on certain weapons, but when it goes to a weapon that can dish out 700 damage per hit, that starts to really hurt, and they didn't really try to fix that or anything. They haven't really touched on it at all.
or
Either they
there's,
just basically just forgot about it when they were actually putting it out.
or there's a certain weapon that shall not be named. It starts with an R. It just, oh my
Ryder
God.
Palash?
No,
Oh,
no, the Rikuyo just gives me conniptions every time I see that thing.
I can't possibly think of the weapon you're talking about.
No.
I never see that. I don't know what you're talking about.
Man, I
What's
I
a
go every
Rikuyo?
day
What's
without
that?
seeing that weapon ever, man. I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, so
No,
needless to
that thing
say,
is.
it
No,
it's a
go ahead.
little broken. I
A
mean,
little.
yeah, just a little.
Okay.
I mean, the spam combos are pretty popular. Um, and honestly, looking at the Rakuyo alone, you know that it is not really a weapon that was intended for this game because it has a dynamic moveset that the other weapons don't have. The L2 changes with respect to the previous attack that was used. You don't really see that with other weapons. And
True. Yeah.
and the actual speed of the weapon seems like it bypasses a lot of the speed of other weapons.
Yeah. I mean, it even
Right.
outspeeds. I mean, the saw spear and those are still more powerful, but it outspeeds them too. Like it's at least from what I can see. Um,
I
and
just feel
then
like they
the
didn't really
phantom
think it
range,
through enough.
yeah, the phantom range that comes with that weapon too is just that's what makes it also a problem as well. Is you try to get away from it, and it's like, nope, still getting hit.
Right,
Yeah, I usually try
it
to
seems like the
like
weapon
dash
is
to the side and I still get hit anyway.
it seems like the weapon is about, I would say, a foot longer than it actually is, the way that the game
They
sees
used
it.
Maria's they used Maria's boss one, and then they're like, well, we don't want to give them that, so let's just make that part of it invisible, and then there you
Yeah,
go.
there's your ghost weapon.
Yep, exactly.
Little did you know.
Um, yeah, so that's that. Oh,
All right, so let's kind of tie this weapon power back to the gem system. It seems like a lot of the small to mid-sized weapons are proportionally more powerful than they should be compared
I
to the
agree.
larger weapons.
Hmm.
And
Yes,
I think a lot of
definitely.
that has to do with the gems and how close they made the ARs and multipliers between those different weapon classes. Like you look at a Kirkhammer, and the R1 of a Kirkhammer hits just as hard as a Blade of Mercy Quickstep R1, the two hand.
Right.
They are polar opposites in terms of weight, in terms of range, in terms of speed. And yet, the Blade of Mercy performs just as well on that single attack as the Kirkhammer that is half as it's at half speed basically.
Yeah.
Right. I think too the for example, the Axe's AR is definitely not proportionate to how much damage it can actually pull out because of the different attacks it can do. But at the same time, a weapon that is twice as fast should not be getting relatively the same AR as the Axe at pretty much any point. Like the Saw Spear can get within 30 AR of the axe and is still twice as fast as it. It makes no sense to me.
Yeah, that's the problem is the heavy weapons and the light weapons, there's literally no reason to pick the heavy weapon over the light because the light weapon outperforms it each time, damage and speed, or close enough, you know. So it's kind of it doesn't make sense, as you said, Swing.
Yeah.
All right, so
See, that's the th sorry, but real
no
quick,
worries.
that's the thing that's kind of the two-handed weapon, the heavier two-handed weapon should do more damage, but it's slower. And the one-handed weapons should do less damage, but reasonable damage, but are a lot faster. That's how it should be. I mean, given a lot of the weapons in Bloodborne are pretty fast comparative to other games, but that's that's just common sense on how that kind of thing should work.
And yeah, I just feel like that's one of the things Dark Souls 3 actually did right. You know, heavy weapons and light weapons both have their uses, you know. Heavy weapons deal out more damage while the light weapons put out damage more quickly, but less of it. And they
Exactly.
do that completely right, and they both have their own metas and their own uh, uses, well as in Bloodborne, there really isn't much of a use for heavy weapons such as that, unless they have like a gimmick like the Wheels Dash R1, where it's actually quite fast. Basically, the only thing that really works in PvP anymore is weapons that you can get fast attacks out with.
That have high AR to back it too. Like the Saw,
Yeah,
that transformation attack on a 50/50 can hit what, 800 on an open hit?
maybe even more if you have open foes.
Yeah, exactly.
Compare that to the Kirkhammer, which can barely do that with blunts on an L2.
Yeah.
So,
It's just like the AR just makes no sense to me because stuff like the Kirkhammer, like just looking at it makes it look like it should be doing more damage than the Blades of Mercy, but it doesn't.
right, exactly. And again, I think it has a lot to do with the way that they implemented their ARs, the base AR and scaling. They made it so that you could go through the game with no scaling, just a base weapon and stuff. But the whole problem is the fact that they were not accounting for curse gems. It seems like the overall balance was for either a very high meta, like just max level, or they were not. accounting for any of it, and they were instead looking at the story gems. Like when you look at how powerful most weapons are, they're all about the same, but tempering the 20% temperings that you can get in the vanilla game seem like they're about what weapons should have been hitting. And instead of sticking with that level, we got the 27.2% tempering gems, the cursed gems in the deepest chalices, plus blunts, plus blood tinged gems, plus, thrust gems.
For
And
sure.
it completely shifts all of that toward being way too high on the damage spectrum. You look at the thrust BOM, the Blade of Mercy. That quick step R1 can hit 600 to 700 damage, and it is one of the fastest attacks in the game. Compare that to a blunt Kirkhammer, which is going to pretty much hit 500 to 600 on that same quick step R1 attack.
Yeah, for sure.
I just don't think they really took into account how much damage they were actually putting in the game when they added those gyms in. I don't think they really realized how many people would find ways to almost exploit and find the easiest paths to those gyms and how to get them quickly and get them as easily as possible. And it opens it to a lot of new players are actually getting those same exact gyms that the veterans are. It's not hidden information. It's very open and very easy to find. Uh, and it's also rather you never see a weapon that was capable of dishing out that much damage with that speed in Dark Souls, where in Bloodborne it's almost more rare to find someone that was doing reasonable amounts of damage. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
uh, doing less damage is like, oh, this dude's got story gems, he doesn't know what he's doing, but that's probably what the game was supposed to be.
Yeah, for sure.
right. While we're on the topic of gems, um, let's talk about the ease of farming comparing the different builds. I think that
Oh, yes.
I think this is an important topic to cover because it seems like the entire game was focused around tempering and physical setups. It was not really considering Blood Tinge or Arcane, although they did give Blood Tinge quite a buff from the nourishing to tempering shift.
No, I
So,
agree.
so about how easy is it to farm temperings compared to, say, arcane gems?
This is what I always compare it to. I finished Cordelia, my skill quality, in about 28 hours. 28 hours, I got three different sets of 27.2 gems. On Jane, I've been working on this build and I have over 70 hours on it and I still have imperfect gems. But another thing is like if I want those perfect gems, it's probably another 70 to 80 hours before I get every single gem I want perfect. Whereas on Cordelia, I'm completely done. Only 30 hours and I'm completely done. I don't have to touch farming on that build anymore. Uh, Especially with like those physical builds, you can get away completely with 27.2s. And the fact that Blood Tinge also works with tempering makes physical qualities and skill tinge builds the easiest to farm for, and then you try to do anything else, and it's just like it takes so much time away from you that you're basically farming all day, every day for multiple weeks, and you're still not done. Whereas you can get all of the farming done for physical builds in a day. And I see a lot of new players, and I'm guilty of this as well. A lot of the veterans will tell the new players, like, do this build or do that build because you don't want to farm for elementals, you don't want to farm for nourishings, you don't want to farm for out of shapes. Do these, physical builds that you can just farm 27.2s on, and that's all they do, and it's easy, and then you just find more and more qualities and frontier and more skill tinges, and it definitely hurts the diversity of PvP, in my opinion. Not so
Yeah,
much just the farming aspect, but also the actual fight aspect of it too, because I go out on my arcane build and I have imperfect gems and I'm, getting R1 spammed to death by people on qualities all day, every day. And if arcane farming was as easy and as rewarding as physical farming was, then that wouldn't happen. People would want to choose that different thing that looked cool to them. They don't want to just like R1 spam on a Saw Spear or a Ludwig's Holy Blade. That's boring.
yeah, for sure. It would have. I don't understand what their logic was with the way they set up the farming for the gems, especially for arcane builds.
Right. Another thing I wanted to bring up too is the fact that there are far more secondaries for gems than there need to be, and almost all of those secondaries are geared toward pure physical builds, like striking. The charged attacks up, it only boosts physical damage, so it's completely useless to any build except a quality, a skill build,
Hmm.
you know, and that just doesn't seem right at all. It seems like the whole game is geared so heavily toward those things that you can't really make arcane work. I mean, yeah, you can make arcane work. It's difficult to get those gems, but you can make it work. However, you're going to suffer for doing it because you're going to be doing a lot more farming. You're not going to have as high output in terms of damage for your weapon, especially if you're using something like the Beast Cutter, something that I personally use. You're not going to have visceral damage because visceral damage scales with skill and physical gems.
Right.
And you're going to have to invest a lot more points into arcane than the hard cap for your melee weapon in order to deal decent spell damage. At 50 arcane, I'll give an example. Brew hits around 350 damage, which is less than a 50-50 saw spear. I mean, that's like a 25-50 saw spear hit. And this is a spell that is quite easy to dodge unless, it's being used in the hands of someone who's very good at aiming their spells and anticipating what their opponent does. It's not until 70 or 80 arc that your spells actually start to deal good damage.
I think you're completely right on that. I think instead of making it so that the tools never stop scaling with arcane, I think they should have hard capped it but increased the scaling from, 10 to 50 so that if you're on a 50 arc build, you're actually dealing that decent damage and you're not having to go to, 70 arc and uh, miss out on having, higher vit or higher skill and strength for different weapons, uh, and you can still have that decent tool damage. It doesn't really make much sense. I mean, JM even called Arcane a special snowflake because it is really just off. It doesn't seem like it really fits with the other elements. And two, like there aren't many arcane weapons. Like there's one pure arcane weapon. There's only one of them. There are,
Yep.
uh, there are two or three, maybe a couple more that I'm forgetting about. Mixed damage ones, but there's still just that feeling of why is there not more of this? Why is there only one pure arcane weapon? It's almost like they completely ditched arcane before they finished it. And what you were saying about the beast cutter weapon, and or rather the converted elemental weapons, such as like a bolt siphon, arcane cutter, or fire saw spear, like I'm using. My fire saw spear, if it was perfect, does 600 damage, or has 600 AR. I can obviously like boost that with, fine strike and get more damage out of it, but I'm still not going to be doing anywhere near what a quality would be doing. But I'm doing like 4 times as much farming just to actually get there, you know? Uh, on a quality saw spear, you get 688 AR just with 27.2s, which you can farm which if you're lucky you can get in an hour. And with a fire saw spear, I could farm for an entire day, still not get perfect gems, and yet I'm still doing less damage. It just makes it feel like Arcane was kind of left out of the whole loop. I feel like there should have been more tools. There should have been uh,
Yeah, 100% on the more tools
Hmm.
thing. It's so limited
more
compared to the
more
other games.
weapons, easier to access gems for Arcane. And I'm not saying like we need faster Arcane, better damage. Just like make it equal. Make it to where uh, if a new player wants to do an Arcane build, he can.
Yeah, exactly. I think also some of the spells needed some hyper armor. The fact
Oh,
that you can just
definitely.
interrupt them at any point is kind of, except for
Especially
like
with
Augur.
gunfire. With
Yeah,
gunfire, that kind of ruins it. Like when I'm trying to charge a brew to hit someone, all they need to do is shoot me once with a pistol and I'm out of the animation. I can't do anything. And if they're constantly spamming that pistol or blunderbuss, there's nothing I can do to get that spell out. They're always going to interrupt it.
I also think a Call from Beyond should have definitely been stronger. Uh, Maybe not stronger, actually. Maybe you reduce the bullet cost of it because it's such a risk and it does considerably like less damage if you don't get multiple hits with it. Uh, and you can just interrupt it with a gunshot, like you were saying. If someone starts an animation, just shoot them. It's so brain dead, you just shoot them. You don't even really have to think about it past that. You don't have to, dodge in, get a quick hit or like a big hit or anything. You can just shoot them, and there's legitimately so little hyper armor with those that uh, it just kind of makes it way riskier than it should be.
All right, so another thing that I would like to point out is how cold and heavy abyssals have affected the potency of strength, quality, and arcane builds. You'd think that a heavy abyssal would benefit strength very well because it's increasing strength scaling. However, it seems like the gem wasn't fully thought through because it adds a flat scaling factor. Like
hmm.
you get a heavy abyssal and it's plus 65 scaling. That's 0.65 times your base AR of your weapon at 99 strength. scaled down with your stat, of course. Stats cap at 50% returns for 25 strength, or actually, in general, stats give the returns of 50% at 25 and 85% at 50. But then you introduce this heavy abyssal, and it's a flat scaling factor. That inherently benefits weapons that do not have strength scaling or have lower strength scaling than high strength scaling, because the high strength scaling weapons are benefiting already from their high scaling and percent gems instead of that flat scaling gem. Like you put a heavy on a Kirk hammer, for example, and it's not doing a whole lot for your AR, but when you look at, say, a burial blade on a quality, that heavy abyssal gets you a lot more AR than just a plain tempering setup.
Right.
Yeah.
Another thing too is like if you're going to add that kind of effect to it, uh, why is it so strength leaning? Because there's no sharp abyssals, so you can't get that extra AR on uh, a skill weapon. Uh, it feels kind of imbalanced, I guess. Um,
Well,
Plus, like
I can answer that
they
question.
add so they add so much more benefit than just having a 27.2, which makes it feel kind of off, I guess. Plus, like because of the fact that there are not a lot of arcane weapons, cold abyssals just don't give you as much as a heavy abyssal would a quality. Uh, I obviously think the scaling gems like that uh, heavy abyssal kind of felt out of place to me because it just added way more benefit than was really necessary.
So I can actually give an answer as to why they added this heavy abyssal, cold abyssal gem. They made it as kind of a band-aid, because before they added those gems, skill and blood tinge were dominating. Quality
Right,
was doing very well, but for the most part, it was skill and quality builds that were top tier. They wanted to buff strength because it was never being used as compared to, all of the skill and tinge weapons. And then when you look at Arcane, it really needed that because most of the weapons that we were using had low scaling to begin with, and then we were required to go beyond that 50 stat cap that you normally have for a stat. The thing is, these gems benefit weapons that have lower scaling and higher base AR. You look at the base AR of Cutter, for example, is 184, and then the actual arcane scaling of it is only D scaling. It's very low. Compare that to Ludwig's Holy Blade, which has 200, but it's got A arcane scaling. That Cold Abyssal is going to benefit the Cutter more than it will the Holy Blade. So
right,
it's basically doing what it's exacerbating a problem that already was in the game, where smaller weapons were being too close in damage to the larger weapons. That's why a 50/50 saw can get up to 714 AR with a perfect heavy abyssal, flat 15 physical, and two 27/2s. Before that, it was, I believe, 685, 686, something like that. And that's quite a substantial increase.
Right.
I'm not saying that colds were a bad thing. I think that Arcane needed something like that, but I think that what they could have done is increased the scaling on weapons inherently so that they wouldn't have to add these scaling gems.
Hmm. Yeah, that would make sense. I agree with that.
And if
Balance it
if they
out
did
from the
make
beginning and not accidentally tip the scales in another meta's favor.
right, and then another thing about it is since it's additive, it's still benefiting those lower scaling weapons, but if they made it so that it was multiplicative, then high scaling weapons would benefit more from those abyssals. Like the wheel, for example, has S strength scaling. You put a heavy on it right now, and it does less than a blunt because the blunt multiplies everything, whereas the heavy is just adding a flat 65% to that 200.
Right.
Yeah, makes it's just the whole gem system was just too much to begin with, as we've been saying. They
It's too much to
tried
think
to.
about, plus it's like too much added damage. It, you know, again, with what you were saying about how a lot of the dungeon content should have just been moved over to the main game, I think you're definitely correct in that a lot of the gyms and stuff like that either shouldn't have been so beneficial, or if they were, make them not necessarily harder to get, but harder to find, I guess. And make it so that you can get by without having to do all this extra dungeon stuff. It just feels really out of place, and it can be really daunting for newer players who want to get into the PvP of the game, but also don't want to have to go through the added stress of going through dungeons and all that.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. So I kind of want to shift this discussion back to kind of the beginning. It's a topic that we kind of skipped over, but I mean we briefly discussed it. The ranged heal parry system is great. Like
I agree.
the
I
introduction
love
of
it.
guns was actually a really interesting idea for countering heals, but it's not without problems. So
Right.
just name some attributes of the gun system, the way that the parry system is set up in this game with guns, and let's kind of get an idea of how guns are implemented compared to Dark Souls or Demon Souls.
Well, I think
Well,
the
for
whole idea about ranged parries is like, it was a wonderful idea. I praise the idea of heal parries and stuff like that, but they made it so that guns can get so strong that you almost shift the meta towards whoever shoots the most wins. Uh, it gets really annoying when, and I was talking about this in a previous discussion where I will actually dash towards people before the fight really heats up because I know what they're doing. They're standing right there. I dash towards them, and immediately they fire their gun. I don't attack. I don't do anything. I know exactly what they're gonna do. They're gonna try to parry me from the very beginning because if they have that 50 skill and decent gems, they're going to one-shot me. It just rewards fishing for parries way more than any other game, and it's less, so much less skilled because you can just spam it, and there's no real way to punish it.
To add on to that, I think that it's important to note that the guns do not have a stamina cost to use, unlike parries in the previous games. And then even in Dark Souls, a parry is risky because you stand the chance of getting backstabbed, you stand the chance of getting dead angled, or you could just miss the parry altogether and just take a hit. But in Bloodborne, when you shoot, if your bullet hits the other player, it's going to stagger them, even if it doesn't
Right.
parry. And I think that's a major issue with the game.
Yeah.
The fact that you
My
can do
main
that.
yeah, my main thing with the whole ranged parries is just with the guns in general in this game is my two main problems is um, they have the potential to become your main weapon in a game that revolves around melee combat, and the other would be that they're spammable. So you like it doesn't take a whole lot of skill to just get a lucky parry off if you're just shooting all 20 of your bullets just get one parry. Um, very, very, it just brings down the competitive nature of the game in a sense where all you need to win in this game is saw, spear, and gun spam. And there you go. You can be a PvP god now. It just,
Right.
if guns aren't punishable, that's half the problem too, is there's no point where you can really punish it unless you're right on top of them and they fire and you're like right next to them. There's no, and even then, like if they're using the blunderbuss, it's even harder. If you're close to them, it would have been easy to fix too. Like a quick reload animation, like Father Gascoigne's, would have been perfect for that kind of thing. So
Right. There's no delay between shots, so it almost tries to reward players who just press L2 over and over and over again, because there's really nothing that you can do about it except, dodging around, and even then you can still get caught. There's the wooden shield, but it reduces your stamina when you use it, and you still get that trickled damage. It it really feels like they didn't think it through to the point where, someone who gun spams is not punishable. Someone who parries in Dark Souls is punishable. Uh,
exactly,
Someone with, high blood tinge and an Evelyn or a repeater pistol can win the fight just by shooting you.
So what's the highest gun damage you've seen in this game outside of the cannons?
Uh,
repeater pistol,
I
bone
got
marrow ash.
I got repeater pistol bone marrow ashed uh, while standing still, not even an open hit, and it did more than half my health. Like, I mean,
You had
almost
50 vit,
70% of
right?
my health. I had
Yeah, 50 vit,
more
right?
than 50 vit, 72.
Oh shit. Damn. Yeah, I believe it. I don't even doubt that.
As you were saying about that quick reload thing, that would have been the perfect thing to make parrying so much more risky. There's no risk in fishing for parries. That's my main issue with them. Is like, again, you don't get punished for sitting there and shooting your gun over and over until you get that
Exactly.
sweet, sweet parry. And then from there, if you have 50 skill, it's a one shot.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's another thing too. The one hit kill viscerals are
yeah.
pretty silly. I
There's,
don't know what they were thinking with that, to be honest.
yeah.
It's kind of funny. You guys are
Eh,
leading into the discussion that I was going to go into next.
yeah.
So, yeah, I
Um,
agree. The the whole game caters too much to the focus on parries and viscerals that one shot, particularly with high skill, just because you have that
for sure.
ability to one shot. The Another thing to point out is the fact that we have burritos where you can get that extra hit in before the visceral, and if you have that on a quality or a 50 skill builds in general, you're going to pretty much one-hit KO guaranteed any player that's invading and possibly even hosts.
Right. If I'm fighting a quality and he gets a burrito, even if I'm on my bit gouge build, it's almost definitely a one shot, and it makes it feel like the fight could have been so much better had it not just ended in 3 seconds, you know?
Exactly.
Alright, so the next thing I wanted to talk about is host HP and healing. As anyone who plays this game knows, co-ops, adversaries, and hostile summons take a 30% HP cut. The host does not, and they automatically heal. Every player automatically heals based on their maximum HP. But something to note is that there is no damage difference between being a host and a summon or invader. Basically, they cut your HP, but there's nothing to compensate for it. Something that we had in Demon Souls is invaders or co-ops automatically got more damage. They were rewarded with their character tendency, which boosted their damage, and they were also given a ring that boosted their damage based on which ring they were using and what form they were taking. Phantoms had a friend's ring, and then invaders had a foe's ring. So, what do you think that they could have done with Bloodborne to emulate that, or even avoid it altogether and just make it balanced?
For one thing, maybe, uh, just the general idea of having an arena. It's kind of a very basic idea, but even if it was like a chalice thing where you could maybe reset the settings to where invaders don't get their HP cut, cooperators don't get their HP cut, all of that. Um, it just feels really unfair when you are an invader with, you know, if you have less than 50 vit, then you're less than 1300 HP, and if they're vit gouged and they don't blood tap, they're at, you know, 2000 or more. It just it makes it feel kind of unfair in a way, and I feel like if they had added an arena to the game, I feel like we would never really have this discussion, but they didn't.
Yep, I agree. The arena of all there's the other thing is there's no equivalent to like a red soapstone either. So it's kind of like what?
Right, like a lot of basically every fight you get if you're not in a closed FC is completely random. Like there's no way to know who you're getting when you get invaded or are the invader.
Right,
Yeah.
the only way to control it is with password matching, but password matching is not quite reliable because the bell system isn't quite reliable.
Right.
Right, yes.
If they had added in something to the effect of like uh basically like a imagine you were in Frontier and there was a bell toll kind of thing, and then you go to a little outlet near the wall or something like that where you can ring a specific bell that's in those areas that allows invaders to come in without that HP cut, uh, as if you're looking for PvP there and it's not just random invades. And that harkens back to the same arena type idea that just was never added into the game.
I think that the Sinister dungeons could have been like that. That way we could make our own arenas. But the problem is that those sinister dungeons are locked away so deep in the Chalice dungeons, hardly anyone goes that deep and actually cares to get those sinister dungeons because there isn't a whole lot of reason to. You know, all it does is it
Right.
grants you a Bell Maiden that spawns immediately and a +1 player capacity that you can get in the Nightmare Frontier and Murgos. Actually, you can't even do
Right.
that, huh? It's just the fact that you are granted that extra player, and setting up those matches is so difficult because it takes so long to connect.
Right. Uh, Another thing about the whole bell system is like I'll be standing in the same exact spot as someone else ringing my bell, and the fact that it's so difficult to get connected to someone, I usually have to ask them, "You're ringing, right?" In Dark Souls, that never happened. I see your sign right there, and I can pick it up. I don't have to ask. Like there's that weird disconnect from the rest of the games where they tried to fix something that wasn't broken, and they made it way, way worse, especially with password matching, because a lot of times, even with the passwords, you can't connect to the person that you know is ringing right there because the way the bells work is so weird.
So, just a little bit of an overview for the Bell system. It's proximity based, which is a big problem for trying to match with anyone. You have to be quite close to them in order to meet up with them at all. So when you're trying to invade, you're basically invading in a little bubble around you instead of invading throughout the world like you could do with some of the previous games. I mean, they did have sections where you could invade, and, you know, if they're anywhere in that section, you're going to invade them. But Bloodborne made it so that you're a moving target, and it's a lot harder to hit a moving target than a fixed target. I mean, that's just, it seems like it's something that they oversaw and really shouldn't have.
Yeah, I agree.
Right.
Plus, another aspect of it is that you
Uh,
can have an AFK host who is ringing his beckoning and summoning players in, but he's gone. The co-ops are just sitting there waiting for him, and you know they might never get to do anything. They might wait 15 minutes and the host doesn't come back, and the invader comes and just kills them. So
Yeah.
right.
yeah, that's another interesting aspect of the Bell system where I think it failed.
Yeah. Again, it's just something that they it wasn't broken to begin with. The sign system was completely fine the way it was. There were random issues, but it was at least reliable for the most part. But the bell system is notably unreliable.
So something that you actually brought up, the signs, summon signs, the Bell system by comparison, like besides password matching, the Bell system is non-selective. Do you think that a summon system like summon signs in this game would have really benefited this kind of game, or do you think that they could have tried to do something a little different with the Bell system to make it better?
Uh, I just don't really see a way to make the bell system really work besides the connectivity issues, make it more reliable so where if two people are ringing around the same area with the same password, then they should be connecting almost immediately. That's basically as far as you can really go with that kind of system, whereas the sign system, uh, you know, it's perfectly selective, I'd say. You know, a lot of the signs will appear first based on how good the connection is between you and that other person. Uh, and so you can get that person almost immediately if you're embered and you run up to the, or, that's in DS3, obviously. If you're embered and you run up to the boss door, you can find a sign almost immediately, just pick it up and then wait 10 seconds for them to load in, and then you go. You go to the front of the boss room in Bloodborne. You don't know if anybody's even there, so you just ring your bell and hope. And it can go 5 minutes before you get someone usually, or maybe even 10 minutes, 15, depending on what time of day it is, what, like, who's on. If they're, if you're on during a time where uh, a lot of people from foreign countries are on, then you're going to have worse connections with them just based on the distance between you and them. Uh, and it just really, it just really messes with the whole co-op or PvP aspect of the game in general.
Okay, so Scorch, about how long do you think it takes to summon when you're in the dungeons doing the Fight Club?
Mm, well, anywhere from anywhere from well, I've had it happen in seconds to the longest being like never, but typically like I don't know, like a few seconds to on average probably a few seconds to like 5 minutes or more, which is it's so inconsistent. You can't really measure like you can't measure it
Yeah,
properly. Not consistent.
Mm-hmm.
that's my main issue with the whole bell system is just how inconsistent it is. It's reliably inconsistent. It's reliably
Yeah.
unreliable. Uh, so you can get in for, it's like 5 p.m. You want to do some 1v1s with your friend, and you can get that shit almost immediately, especially if you live relatively close to each other, like maybe 1 or 2 states away. Uh, and then, come 8 p.m., 9 p.m., you go into a closed FC with a bunch of people, and then there's, 7 to 10 people ringing, all ringing sinister bells, and literally no one can connect at all.
Yeah. Comes down to how the net code is, and I don't know. It just seems like the servers. I mean, it seems like it's getting better now that a lot of the new players are not. There's not as many new players on, which that's kind of a sad thing to say. Like, oh, there's not as many new players, so now the game actually works.
So do you think
Yeah,
that
that's
this,
that's another thing. Is like recently,
oh,
like these past couple of days, the connections with people have been so much better. There's still issues around the same exact times and the same exact places like closed FCs, but it's still much better than it was.
Yeah,
Like
for sure.
today I could probably do some PvP and have literally no issues, but you know, 10, 15 days ago that was just not the case. It was just so laggy, so messy looking. Well, like if you look at some of my montages that I wanted to get done during that time, I couldn't get those clean looking no lag fights because that's all I was getting ever was just laggy frame skipping nonsense.
I actually
Seems about
noticed
right.
that in our fights the other night, Swing, when you and I were in the chalices, we were seeing some really weird stuff, like the the skipping. There was a lot of skipping, and then there was also some really strange moveset stuff that was going on because of that skipping. Like, there was one instance where you were doing a backstep R2 with your cutter, and there was absolutely no wind up for it. It was just instantaneous
No
and killed
animation.
me.
Yeah. I backstepped and all of it was on both of our ends too. It was just like it was so weird because I even have the clip of it um, where if I backstep R2 right now, there's an animation, a wind up, and a finish. It basically just like it did the backstep animation, skipped all the rest, and then put out the damage to it. It was really odd.
Yeah, I've seen some weird shit too. It's starting to seems like it's for me at least. I haven't seen as much of it lately, but there's some pretty awful moments not
Even
that
that
long ago.
stuff even that stuff with me and Astri's fights was way better than some of the shit that happened during the month of March when Scorch was trying to do
Yeah.
OCs, where I would join in, you would just like teleport behind me, teleport in front of me, teleport like to the side of me, and then all of a sudden I'd be damaged, and it was like,
Yeah.
what the fuck is going on?
Yeah.
Yeah, another thing that I noticed when we were fighting is that there were some weird moments where it seemed like we were both getting caught up on absolutely nothing, and I don't know if it's just the way that the server's handling it or if there's something else going on, but it seemed like there was some sort of interference there with our character models, and that I've never seen that
Yeah,
happen in any of the other games.
Yeah.
it
Hmm.
I always felt like I was getting caught on something that didn't exist randomly, like the animation for my beast cutter didn't go off, or you would, dash over an already broken pile and it kind of seemed like you would
Well,
skip over it, almost like your character model would just like frame skip over it as if like it was a non-existent plane where your body just couldn't, exist in that plane, and then all of a sudden you would teleport to where that pile wasn't, but it was already broken, so there really shouldn't have been any issues with it at all.
Do you think that it's true that they throttled down the servers right before the PlayStation Plus sale?
Definitely, definitely, because it was a day before the PlayStation Plus free thing happened, where me and Damnation have always had perfect connections. You know, sometimes we have trouble connecting to each other in the first place, but once we're in the same world, we have perfect fights. I have clips of our fights where it's just like the most fluid internet connection, and I have decent internet, and he has wonderful internet, so it's like completely fluid throughout the whole thing. And then, like, a day or two before he comes into my world, we're trying to set up a little testing thing, and then I'm like, can you just like lock onto me and dash around a bit? And it was so bad. He was just like jumping and teleporting and all this, and I'm just like, this should not be happening. There's no way this should be happening.
Do you think that they were doing that to cut costs, or do you think that they just did it?
I mean, it could have been that, or it could have been them trying to, uh, you know, cool down the servers and in preparation for, the influx of players. And once the influx of players happened, the servers also took a hit just because of how overloaded they were. So it was really bad for that time period. And now that the influx of players has gone down, it's getting better, but I almost feel like it's still slightly throttled down because again there are issues in closed FCs where the uh, stress on the server might be a little more intense with that kind of thing, whereas in randoms it's like completely clear now, but it's still much better.
Yeah, I've noticed it's improved overall, but the closed FC thing is still a little bit messy. But yeah. Um, I think this is where I have to end stream. If you guys want to
All right.
continue without me, that's fine.
But we were just about to
I
talk about your favorite subject.
oh no,
Uh-oh.
Save editors.
Oh
that's okay.
boy.
You guys got that covered. If
Yeah,
you
we
guys want to
can.
continue on, uh, it was good hanging with you guys, and I'll see you for the next one that we do. Okay?
All right. Take care.
All right, Scorch.
Okay.
Thanks for
Toodaloo,
coming
all that
by
are
and
in chat, and good one.
see you, my dude.
So swing. Save editors.
Yes. Yes, my favorite subject ever.
It's been more than a year, and nothing has been done.
Nothing has been done. It's only getting worse.
How many save editors have you met since the very beginning of this influx?
uh, Before I knew what was happening, because I was actually late to the party in the aspect of knowing what was going on, I would come across some player that was doing crazy damage and I wasn't doing a lot of damage to him, and I was on, whatever equality or a high skill build that should have been doing damage, and I just wouldn't know what was going on, and I didn't really record it or anything like that just because I didn't know. But since I figured out what was going on, I have met at least 12 uh, cheaters in this game, and a couple of them I even made videos and they got on the blacklist, or I would go on the blacklist and I'd see them on there later and be like, oh, I just didn't think to block them because they were, you know, back on the first 20 of the list, and I feel like they should have gotten bored of it by then, but they didn't, and then, it's just, it's just, even meeting more than one is too much. Even meeting one is too much.
I agree. So right now, the blacklist went up to 86, I think yesterday, and Scorch has two more to add to the list, and then I've heard two other players who have said 3 or 4 times that they've met someone but they didn't record it. So I kind of wanted
Yeah,
to revisit this and talk about it, but also spread knowledge and let people know that this blacklist is there for it's there as a resource so that we can avoid these cheaters. But the only way
right,
that it can be effective is if we have the list of PSNs with video footage or at least pictures of them admitting that they were cheating.
right. Uh, One thing is like, there's no soft ban in Bloodborne. I don't think they really realized that there was going to be a huge save editor thing, because on PC it's way easier. You can go on Google and find hacks for Dark Souls 3 on PS3 just like that, like so easy. But on Bloodborne it's a little more difficult, but it's still present and it's still a problem. You know, uh, there are over 80 people on the blacklist, and it's almost just sad because if there were 50 people on there, and when there were 50 people on there, I thought that is just like way too many.
I think we've
And
gotten at least 7 this week.
yeah, and even with the influx of players, it's gotten worse because of the fact that those players don't know that it's cheats. They think, oh, whatever, he just like went to a dungeon and got the best gems at, BL43 or whatever. But there's legitimately no way that you can, you know, there's one video of some guy getting one shot with an R1 from a bloodletter, and that's just not even possible, even if you have like
31
low
fives, yeah.
vit, yeah, low vit, and then they have 31 fives, and it's still based on the scaling of the weapon and the scaling of your levels too. So it's just not possible. And then they think, whatever, they got wonderful gems and then one shot me with those, but in reality, it's cheaters, and I think there are probably even more that we don't even know about because of people just not knowing.
Right, exactly. I don't think that the blacklist is known by a significant number of people. I'm thinking probably in the hundreds, low hundreds, maybe 200 people know about it. That's my guess. And
Yeah,
something that I really would like to bring up is the fact that this blacklist is currently sitting at almost 90, and our PSN block list is capped, I think, at around 100. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm guessing it's about 100. So, what are we supposed to do after that maximum is reached?
it's hard to just pick and choose people because, as soon as you pick someone like, oh, he hasn't been on in, whatever, how long, I can take him off my block list and then just add one of the more recent cheaters because those people can come back at any time and then ruin your day. Uh, Also, like the with the save editor, I believe you can just like copy all of your save data from one PSN and then just make a new PSN, copy all of it back to your new one, and
Right, it's
then
a matter of just changing the ID on the
right,
save.
and there's no like IP block or anything like that that you can really do that's gonna really help you. Uh, because it just takes so much time, and there are 85, 86 people that you would have to do that with. It's just there's really there really shouldn't be this much struggle in having a completely hacker cheater free PvP experience. There should have been a soft ban kind of thing implemented in it, but they just didn't really think it would happen.
So, another thing that I'd like to reiterate from my last podcast about this topic is PSN used to have an option to report players. However, they removed that shortly before, possibly even after, the save editors showed up, and they have not reinstated that feature.
Yeah,
So,
that should definitely get reinstated because it's just like the people at PlayStation, they should have like the player's best interest at heart. They really should. They should be listening to the fact that, nobody wants to play against a cheater. It's just unfair. It's just stupid. Unless you're a cheater as well and you want to show off that your cheats are better than their cheats or some shit, like it really shouldn't be a thing. There should have been some form of soft ban.
another issue with Sony and how they're dealing with save editors. They recently came out with a firmware update 5.50 that makes it so that save editors don't work with current saves. However, this is still bypassed. I think that they were trying to put a quick band-aid on the problem, but it's a lot more serious than that.
Yeah, it's like putting a band-aid on open heart surgery. It just doesn't really do what it needs to do. Uh, Again, if someone takes a USB stick with their saves and comes back with all this extra shit, it should be able to detect that and put them in that soft ban kind of situation where they can only match with other hackers. And, that could even be a little fun thing where hackers fight against hackers. That's at least bearable because it's not impeding on other, you know, honorable PvP. Uh, and it would definitely make our lives easier because we wouldn't even have to do this whole blacklist thing where we try to, spread the message of these people are hackers, go to 86 different people's PSN and block them individually. It's annoying, it's hard, and it's time consuming. And there, if there was some form of uh, soft ban, soft block, you know, whatever, we wouldn't even have to do that. It just the fact that they didn't implement that means we have to do all this extra work.
So the last thing that I wanted to talk about with regard to Bloodborne and the community as a whole, I feel like there have been a lot more negative attitudes lately. Not just, like people being salty, but it's much deeper than that, and some of it has to do with, save editors because there are players out there who think that they have to save edit to win. So
Yeah,
I would just like to talk to you about that ideology, the fact that there are players who think that they must absolutely use a save editor to win, and then if you're not doing it, you're obviously not a good player. That kind of mentality. I think that is very flawed.
definitely. Because you should not be uh, made fun of or looked down upon because you put in the time and the hard work that goes into getting, all the gyms, all the level setups for different builds. You should not feel like you should not ever feel like uh, all that time was wasted just because some dude did the same thing that took you, you know, 75 hours, took them 10 to 15 minutes.
So there are certain individuals in this community who actually have that ideology. They think that they are very high in the rankings because they are using save editors to get those perfect gems, those almost unattainables or even unattainables. And then they will go out of their way to pick fights with people.
Right. Uh,
I could name individuals who do this, but there's one in particular that has done this with me. I've called him out twice for cheating and for bad behavior, lying. I think that as a whole, it feels like the community is going downhill, not just because of save editors, but because of personalities and attitudes like you have to win at all costs, and if you
yeah.
lose, it's not your fault. the person who beat you wasn't better than you, they just got lucky, all that stuff.
Right.
I think that they just
Uh,
take the game too seriously.
there are certain people, and I won't name names or anything like that, but there are certain people that are known save editors that will basically try to brag that they've beaten you so many times or whatever, whether that's true or not, and they will go out of their way to try to make you feel like you're a worse player, even if, that's not even what you're playing for. A lot of people just want to get on, they've had a rough day, they've been working or going to school, and they just want to do some fun PvP, and then this person shows up with save edited gyms, almost unattainables, and then wins, and then BMs them to shit, and then that just makes the whole experience less fun. So a lot of the people that uh, are honorable players that put in the time to get the gems that they want for their build will actually consider leaving because of the fact that the community is so toxic. I mean, there's toxic. Sorry, I had to cough. There's toxicity in every Souls game and pretty much any game in general. Like, especially PvP games, where, certain people will do shitty things and that's whatever, but it's when those people who do shitty things come to you and try to degrade you and make you feel stupid, whether it works or not, or they try to brag that they're so much better of a player, that's when it just like it gets way worse because of the fact that that's not even what I care about, you know. I care about having fun, I care about having a good time. Uh, I want to try new things and try interesting things, and that means I have to put in a lot of time to do it, and when you're putting 15 minutes into it and then calling yourself a better player just because you beat me once or twice, it makes it feel uh, kind of like I've put a lot of time into something that didn't really pay off in the end, but it really shouldn't have to be that way.
So I've actually had problems with a certain individual in this community. I don't know what his issue is. I think that he does take the game too seriously, but he after I posted a video, um, basically a video response to one of his videos where he tried to shame me or make me seem like I'm, some salty honor kid from Demon Souls who can't grow up. He he tried to make me look bad picking on me with his video, and then when I posted a video response, I got a response in the comments where he said, I'm going to stream snipe you into the dirt, I'm going to always be in your shadow, all that stuff. And he actually challenged me to a first to 5 or a first to 10. I think it was a first to 10 actually. And I had to decline because at the time I was having some major health issues. My heart was, I was having frequent palpitations because I've got a heart condition where one side of my heart is a little slower than the other and it causes uneven heartbeat. I tried to explain that. I tried to get him to understand that, but it feels like he didn't quite get it. Like, it was just an excuse. And I even offered to show him a doctor's note or to even talk to him personally over chat about this issue. But he still persisted and said that I was just pussing out. Now, note, he was challenged by at least two other players and declined. Do you think
Right.
that people like that are really good for this kind of community?
No, and they should. Those kind of people, especially, if a cheater does something stupid where he does, whatever, two-shot flame sprayer just for shits and giggles and then gets put on the blacklist and he comes back, realizes what he did was bad, then, someone like that is much more honorable. And I would almost say that if they prove themselves to be a good person and they've changed their ways, then, maybe take them off the blacklist eventually. But with people like that you were talking about, where they openly save edit it, uh, then talk shit, then challenge people, then pussy out themselves, and then call other people pussies, or, you know, uh, lie, uh, degrade other players, stuff like that. It's just like that's way worse for the community than someone that was doing some stupid two-shot flame sprayer and then realized what they did was wrong. Because they realized what they did was wrong, but the person that is so stuck up and high on their own fumes that they can't, they just should not be allowed back in the community.
Something interesting to note, I've recently been in contact with someone on the blacklist. He was actually one of those people who was bragging about save editing, having, this crazy AR, 1.5 million or 2.5 million AR bow blade and being able to one-shot people. And this is a player that would actually stream where he was using those edited characters, picking on people. But after having had a talk with him, uh, I actually sent him a message after seeing something, a post on the Next Gen Mods website, I believe. I saw that he was complaining about the blacklist and being on it. But when I spoke to him on PSN, he opened up to me and said, he didn't realize that he was being, and I'll quote, a bitch, because I guess he saw it as fun and he didn't really understand the fact that he was dealing a lot of damage to the community by doing something as simple as using those hacked gems and one-shotting
Right.
people. I think a lot of these hackers don't understand that very principle, that what they're doing is damaging. And just seeing that someone on the blacklist could be turned around and actually be a worthwhile player to the community was really encouraging to me. He actually had duels with me the other night on Demon Souls, and we've been talking pretty regularly now. So it's really nice. I just wish that something like that would occur more often. If that happened with all of the members on the blacklist, that would just completely change the community around.
Something that I want to add to this is like cheating in other communities isn't, you know, non-existent. Dark Souls deals with it a lot better than Bloodborne, but in games that literally have nothing to do with FromSoft games, like the same thing occurs. Players will leave because of the influx of cheaters and hackers when there's not really anything going on to stop them, and then once there is that thing that kind of nukes that cheater influx, then the players who genuinely love the game will come back, and even the cheaters will come back and apologize and say like, whatever, I was, you know, lost for time and I just wanted a easy way to get my stuff together and I want back into this game because I really love it. For example, two different games. RuneScape had a bot problem back in the day where you would go to certain towns and there would just be nothing but bots who were, macro programs that would just do the work for you. And then aim hackers in Overwatch or CS:GO or Osu that would come back and say, I did something completely wrong. I fucked up. Uh, I I love this game. I want to keep playing it, but a lot of it was the community. I'd really like to be a part of the community again. And those people usually get accepted back because of the fact that they did it once, they got banned, they're not going to do it again because they love the game, they don't want to get banned again. Uh, but there's not really that
There's no threat.
yeah, there's no threat here of getting that ban, and I feel like if there was, then a lot of the hackers that do this thing probably wouldn't do it as much as they did.
I think that's a good point to bring up, the fact that there is no threat of being banned. Right now, no one has been banned, to my knowledge, from the blacklist. All of the players that are on it can still connect, and they could still use their hacked characters to deal, insane damage, one-shot people, and, they do that without any threat of losing. But
Right.
for every player that they kill that way, I think that there's going to be a small percentage of players who are going to back out of the game because they're just so tired of it. I know that Scorch and I are both feeling kind of like doing that because it's just been so bad lately. You get so many people who, I mean, just the other night I was on for 2 hours. I met two hackers. Uh, I believe Scorch met two as well, two different ones. So, I mean, if that's one night of PvP for someone, that's a lot. That's
Yeah.
At that point it's getting to be unbearable. If it was one, per week, okay, that's not that bad. But once every hour or two, it's getting up there. And they're all different. You can't do anything about stopping new ones from doing it because even though there is that 5.50 firmware update to prevent current editing, it doesn't stop people from editing on consoles that are in a previous version,
Right.
and those saves can be transferred forward.
Right. I just I agree with you on the thing where it's like it's gotten to the point where a lot of the players, even the veterans, are starting to get so tired of it that they're considering just dropping the game entirely, and the only thing that's keeping him here is, you know, the fact that, we've all of us have put so much time into this game, we don't want to just abandon it because of a current issue, but it's not getting better. In fact, it's getting worse, and uh, basically the only thing that keeps me playing this game is the closed FCs where I can fight people that, you know, I know are good, I like fighting, and that's what keeps me playing PvP on a constant basis. Um, but if that wasn't there, if there had been no way to connect to, only people you knew, then yeah, I'd have dropped this like a month ago, honestly. But, you know, it's it's that it's that drive to find that good quality fight that keeps you going and keeps you interested in the game, and it just makes you yearn for that soft block or ban or anything that would almost save the community. It's not gonna, fix everything, especially with how toxic some of the people are, but it's definitely gonna fix a lot of the things, and it would be uh, something that would make it much, much easier to keep going.
Well, I think that we've covered all of the topics. What are you hoping will happen with regard to the save editor issue in the near future? Do you think that there's going to be anything done, or do you think that this game is just doomed to become a cesspool of cheaters where we've got no way to combat them because we don't have the means to via the PSN blacklist and my
Well,
blacklist?
I think this whole podcast and this stream should be, a good way to help people realize how bad this stuff has gotten, and it was a great idea, by the way. I think, like, if the community speaks loud enough, they have to listen. They can't just, like, ignore it if basically every Bloodborne player is, you know, active and trying to put an end to it. Uh, but you don't see that kind of uh, motivation from a lot of the players that come across this stuff. They see a hacker, they put them on their block list, and then they forget about it, you know. But it's gotten to the point where that's just not going to be enough, um, and we will actually have to speak up, you know. And if we do, they'll have to. I hope that they implement some sort of soft ban, even if they have to do a Bloodborne 1.08 just to implement that, and maybe even fix a lot of the issues that a lot of players are complaining about. Uh, that would be so beneficial to keep the community alive and keep the game alive, because the PvP is what kept me playing this game. I would have gotten so bored of this game had it not been PvP. I would have maybe done New Game Plus 2, and then that would be it. But luckily for me, I got invaded a couple of times while I was playing the main game, and it made me completely fall in love with the PvP.
What I'm hoping will happen is they're going to see the blacklist, see these podcasts, as unlikely as it is, and hopefully implement something that prevents save editors from connecting to multiplayer, because there is currently no such measure right now. They have the 5.5 hours to prevent save editing, but it's easily bypassed. I really, really hope that there is a network built in that allows, well, it not allows, but it prevents these players from connecting at all, because there's no reason for us to always be in fear of being invaded by a cheater. And I've seen how bad it can be when you get the save editor in your world and there's nothing you can do except disconnect. Like they come in, they use Gatling gun and they just spam you to death, or they they shoot you with the bow blade from, you know, all the way across the arena and you're dead, or they shoot you with Evelyn. It's just it's so frustrating to have to deal with that. And if From Software wants to continue making these games, I think that what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to implement network filters for Bloodborne. I think that there's already something for Dark Souls because cheating's not that common, but I have seen a recent example of someone who was save editing to be invincible. And
Yeah,
I would
but
also worry about future games.
even on the PS4 version of Dark Souls 3, there is a implemented detection feature where it can detect that you've been messing with the saves, and even if Bloodborne just had that, it would be way better. It can probably be bypassed somehow, but it's way more work to do that than it is for, how it is in Bloodborne where you can just get away with it. There's no there's no real detection, there's no threat to them or anything.
hmm So, with regard to this new From Software project, Shadows Die Twice, do you think that it's going to be like Bloodborne, or do you think that it's going to be some kind of Soulsborne hybrid, possibly even something like Neo?
I think, in all honesty, it's not going to be Bloodborne 2. I don't really know. I don't think that it's going to be a re remaster, redo of one of their older games or anything like that. I think it's going to be a completely unique and new title that's along the same lines as Souls,
It
but
kind of
it's going
seems
to
like it
be,
draws inspiration from Bloodborne, but I think what we can expect is that it's going to be in a new direction.
yeah, if it is Bloodborne 2, like, hell yeah, and like they can fix all the problems that were in this one and that new one, we all can happily switch over, but, you know, that's fantasy. There are going to be problems with that as well. Uh, I think they could definitely take a lot of the criticisms of Bloodborne and DS3 and all of their previous titles and, you know, really take all of that and make a wonderful game. It's the community that really decides a lot of the updates to the games, but it's FromSoft that makes them. But if they would listen to us from the beginning, then they could really make something really wonderful.
I agree.
And I'm really excited for it too because like I'm I'm so hopeful that it's going to be like the next the next addiction because my Bloodborne addiction is starting to wear off a little bit because
Yeah,
of this all of the issues that we've talked about today.
I agree. Hopefully, hopefully they do learn from past mistakes about weapon balancing, um, game balancing in multiplayer, save editing, and anti-cheat stuff that they can implement. Because we all know that pretty much any game on PS4 can be save edited, so it's just a matter of time for someone to figure out how to manipulate the game's save data after the game comes out. I'm hoping that
Right.
this new title takes that and makes it so difficult that we don't see it. and also pushes the multiplayer in a positive direction, not just making it so it's all about more players, because a higher player maximum isn't necessarily going to make the game better, the multiplayer better. It's focusing on mechanics, important mechanics that is going to make a difference, and then also making it so that you're not going to have this all-powerful meta like quality in Bloodborne, for example.
Yeah, I mean, they could definitely learn a lot from basically the community and the fact that, you know, if you're going to make different weapon factions, I guess, where, certain builds have certain weapons and certain builds don't, where it's like, that's great, and even if the farming to get those builds completed is taxing or time consuming, uh, as long as it's balanced, then that makes it completely worth it. Uh, Two, the netcode is not the issue with these games. I mean, they're obviously like, Wi-Fi warriors that come in and like teleport around on my screen or whatever, but you know, that's that's circumstantial.
Mm-hmm.
And
Play
if
Bloodborne on a good day and you don't have any of that. It's it's just straight connections and you don't see phantom range.
even if there was not any connection issues ever in Bloodborne, there would still be issues with the balancing. It would actually just put the focus more on the balancing issues than on the netcode or connection issues. Um, so yes, uh, focus on making the netcode better, or just uh, make dedicated servers, even though I know that really wouldn't work out in their favor. Uh, but the main thing they need to focus on, especially for multiplayer and PvP, if they want to keep that alive in their games. There's the joke that Miyazaki hates PvP, but I really don't think that's the case. Um, you know, balance the weapons, make pretty much everything viable, but don't make it so that it makes no sense, kind of like how Bloodborne did, where the fast weapons are just as strong as the slow weapons, or
Agreed.
rather, the fast weapons do just as much damage as the slow weapons, so there's this disgusting imbalance.
Agreed. On a final note, I'd like to point out to anyone who doesn't know, the Demon Souls servers went down about a month ago, a little over a month ago, and right from the start, um, we got private servers set up. So I'm going to probably be taking a long break from Bloodborne and hopefully get some streaming gear so that I can record and stream on Demon Souls.
Yeah, and if I get all my stuff set up and get my PS3 fixed and get my build going, then I'd definitely want to join in on that. I'd still want to do some Bloodborne, but uh, basically like even it out a little bit, like 50% Demon Souls, 50% Bloodborne. It sounds really fun.
The PvP is fun. I mean, it's not perfect, but in the whole series, I think that it's pretty safe to argue that it is one of the most balanced in the whole series. The PvP is really nice, and you can make just about anything work. So I look forward to seeing you on Demon Souls and around Bloodborne anytime that you are available. I'm going to continue making content for both Bloodborne and Demon Souls once I get my recording gear, hopefully soon. Also, there's going to be
Yep.
a weekly fight club, so anyone who's not part of the Demon Souls Discord, you can find a link on Reddit and join and become part of the fray.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun, and it'll be definitely a big breath of fresh air from, you know, especially when the community is starting to falter a little bit in Bloodborne. If anybody that's watching here wants to get on that hype train, I'm sure Astri knows a lot more about it than I do. So,
Yeah,
uh,
and I've already got info posted on my channel. Demon Souls Lives, the video. It shows how to connect to the server. I've got a link to the Demon Souls Discord. So if
and I will be linking that video and your channel on my chat.
perfect, and I can link yours too. Well, thanks for watching, everyone, and listening to some old Souls vets rant about a game. It's been a
Yeah,
pleasure.
yeah, it's definitely been really fun. It's just a lot of stuff that's been on all of our chests, especially the people that have been doing this for, 2 years or whatever. Even if, you weren't paying attention 2 years ago like I was to how interesting the game could be, the the people that have even been playing for, 5 to 6 months are, they're getting a little, it leaves a bad taste in your mouth. And uh, getting that off your chest and knowing that other people are having these same issues is really kind of eye-opening, and uh, really helps to better the community in a way.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining me in this podcast, Swing Dog, and all you
Thanks for having me.
viewers.
Yep.
Oh,
Thank you to all who are watching here. I know it's not my usual stream. I'm usually just goofing off and doing whatever the fuck I want in Frontier or in a Fight Club or whatever, but these are real issues that we're all having. I'm sure pretty much anyone here that does PvP on a constant basis knows exactly what we're talking about.
agreed. All right, that concludes the podcast. So, thanks for watching, and take care, everyone.
Yep. To everyone, I will probably be